Hey everybody, welcome to Armchair Philosophy. I'm Rubin Marshak, and today we're going to be talking about Buddhist philosophy. Buddhism began about 2,500 years ago with the philosopher or mystic or saint Siddhartha Gautama, also known as Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, or just Gautama Buddha. According to some reports, Siddhartha Gautama was born in 563 BCE and died at around 483 BCE, making him about 80 years old at the time of his death. But the mystical stories of Siddhartha Gautama's birth and enlightenment aren't really the focus here. We're going to be looking at the contents of his philosophy, starting with his first sermon at Deer Park. That sermon established the beginnings of Buddhist philosophy and ethics and the foundations of the entire religious system of Buddhism as well. The most significant contribution that Siddhartha made to philosophy in this sermon was his introduction of the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are as follows. 1. Life is suffering. 2. Craving or attachment is the root cause of suffering. 3. There is a possible end to suffering, or suffering has the quality which says that it can end. And 4. The way to end suffering is by following the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path can be summarized as follows. You're doing it right if all of the things that follow are done right. 1. Your view. 2. Your intention. 3. Your speech. 4. Your actions. 5. Your livelihood. 6. Your effort. 7. Your mindfulness. And 8. Your concentration. This is really just to say that the focus of the ethics of Buddhism are to do all of those things the correct way, and in doing so, to cease your own suffering. What might be thought of as the correct way is that which follows the middle way. During Gautama Buddha's time, there were various religions which required very strict asceticism or detachment from worldly things. People would engage in ridiculous behaviors such as self-starvation in order to win spiritual brownie points. Siddhartha's middle way was really just preaching that the correct way to do things was somewhere between the way that commoners do them without regard for the divine and the ways that the intense yogis do them. This was all supposed to culminate in the realization of something called a Not Mun, or no self or non-self, depending on which tradition you follow, which would then lead to your own enlightenment. A Not Mun specifically refers to a monistic point of view of metaphysics similar to the ones of the Hindus who were practicing at the time that Buddhism was invented. The next major philosopher in Buddhism was Nagarjuna. According to Buddhist canon, Nagarjuna lived from around 150 to 250 and died at about 100 years. Inspired by Gautama Buddha's philosophy of Anatman, Nagarjuna proposed something which he called sunyata. Sunyata is essentially the same thing as Anatman, but it doesn't refer to a self, it refers to all things, saying that all things are fundamentally empty or devoid of form. In order to justify this claim, Nagarjuna proposed that there are two kinds of truth: the real truth, or absolute truth, and then the provisional truth, or conventional truth. Provisional truths are those things which make statements about what is here in phenomenal reality. Nagarjuna believed that those things which are true in phenomenal reality may be true, but may not be true of absolute reality. Hence why this is referred to as the doctrine of two truths, or the two truths doctrine. In accordance with his monistic view of the world, Nagarjuna also saw causation as provisional. He didn't think that it was true of absolute reality. In modern times, there are either 2 or 3 major schools of Buddhism depending on who you ask. The one that we believe to be the oldest is called Theravada, or the Lesser Vehicle. It was the goal of early Theravada monks to try and perfectly record all of the Buddha's words and present a pure teaching from what he said. Collections of these accounts of the Buddha's words are recorded in what's called the Pali Canon. The goal of Theravada Buddhism is essentially to attain enlightenment for oneself and become what is called an arhat. But Nagarjuna's philosophy had a bigger influence on the Mahayana school, or the greater vehicle. The distinction between lesser and greater vehicle isn't supposed to be a slight, it's just supposed to be pointing out what the focus of the school of thought is. The Mahayana school is the largest school of Buddhism today with the most followers, and it also has the largest canon with the most amount of texts in it. But it's called the greater vehicle because it's supposed to be more group-oriented. The goal of Mahayana Buddhism isn't to become an arhat, though that is admirable. It's to become what's called a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is someone who's achieved enlightenment but then chooses to stay within phenomenal reality in the cycle of reincarnation in order to help others achieve enlightenment. The foundation of their ethics is still in the Four Noble Truths, but most Mahayana schools place a lot more emphasis on compassion. And instead of the heavily recorded sermon-like things in the Pali Canon, they use things called sutras, which are more like the Hindu Gitas. They're more artistic and poetic. The third school, sometimes considered a subset of Mahayana, is Vejrayana, or the diamond vehicle. This is a highly esoteric and magic-based school of Buddhism, which is mainly practiced in Tibet, but has also been practiced in other parts of Asia. Instead of the sutras, which they may still follow, they chant things called mantras, which are more focused and to the point and meant to be meditated upon. They also produce mudras, or hand symbols, in order to gain some kind of esoteric powers or specific meditative focus. And they even study the ancient Hindu traditions of yoga. Real traditional magical yoga, not just stretching around. Some schools of Vejrayana Buddhism have tended towards a more linguistic extremism. Some even believe that any word which is uttered fundamentally has craving behind it, and that needs to be sussed out before someone can reach enlightenment. But that's just about where mysticism and philosophy separate, so I'm not going to be covering any of that. I hope that based off of this knowledge, if you didn't know anything about Buddhism before, you learned a little bit more about what they think. And if you did know about Buddhism, maybe you didn't know about all of the neat Vajrayana stuff. That's all I wanted to cover, but if you liked the video, you should give it a like, comment, share it around, and if you really want to support us, go onto our Patreon and you can donate to us, or go onto the website, MilwaukeeAtheist.com, and you can buy a t-shirt. That's all for this time. Bye-bye now.